You are not alone in your struggles, in your loneliness, in your failures. You're not alone. Even in things that aren't bad, things that are just broken, you're not alone in that. And if we would be willing enough to be like Jesus and show people our scars, they would know that healing exists.
Well, do you know you're wired for joy? I mean, we're not talking the, fake smile, put joy on type thing, or not I feel guilty about being sad joy, but deep down, laugh out loud, overflowing joy that thrives no matter what your personality or circumstances are. And that's why we're talking with Tauren Wells this morning, his new book. I've got it in my hands. This is fun to say, Tauren. Bible teacher. And of course, I knew that you wrote songs. And I didn't know that you were pastoring now. That's exciting.
Yeah.
That's huge.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
So it's bringing joy to Tauren right now. So yeah, we're excited to talk about this. And obviously we know you from songs like Known, Joy in the Morning, one of my favorites. Speaking of joy, your most recent Take It All Back. What an anthem.
That fires me up. In a good way. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, welcome to the show. Appreciate it.
Glad to be here. Thank you so much for having me. Always a joy to speak with you.
Well, thank you for the opportunity and talk about this. I mean, what a great topic. Your first book. So what led you to writing about joy today?
It was my own personal journey, and actually it started with the song that you referenced, Joy in the Morning. And, I've been doing this since, a lot of people may not know this, but I was in a band before I was a solo artist, a band called Royal Taylor. And even back then, every song that we wrote, that we put out, I wrote a devotion for. And so we would release them through youth ministries and things like that at the time. And so I've kept that going. I did some collaborations with YouVersion for Known, God's Not Done With You, some devotions like that. And so it's just been a common theme that once God kind of breathes a song in my direction, that I would start to unpack the theme of that song so that, when people ask about it, they've already experienced the lyric and the melody. They really want to know the heart and the layers behind it. And I always kind of feel like songs are kind of the top layer of ideas. And so it's beautiful because we get the top layers of themes like hope and grace and peace and all of these things through music. But the Bible is so rich and God is so wonderful that something like joy has very deep, complex layers to it. So when I started singing about joy and talking about joy and investigating it for a Devo that I wrote, I realized there is so much here that I was unaware of and that served my heart so well and served my soul so well. And so I wanted to share that with people. So I was going through the Bible in a year. I was reading through a Bible plan a couple years ago. And I came across a devotion that talked about Matthew 5. And it just pointed me in the direction of this idea that the word blessed that Jesus uses in the Beatitudes means happy, which many of us know, but I don't think we fully considered the impact that Jesus speaking about happiness actually has made and the implications that lie in the way that he leads us to joy, not in the great beyond, but the great beyond within. And so I'm very excited to share this message with people. I think it's going to meet people right where they're at.
Just in your cadence and your talking, I can hear you preaching right now. I can
Got
hear
it
you.
down. That's a good thing.
Exactly. We're ready to get after it. With everything that's going on in the world, it seems like our joy is under attack today. But you said you got good news in the face of that.
Yes. we get to throw something back. When the world throws everything it has at us, God has given us something to throw back. It's joy. But first, before joy impacts everybody else around us, it has to detonate within us. And that's why I wanted to call this book Joy Bomb. And the publisher, I had a couple people, they were on the fence about the title. Like, can we mail this book to people?
Can we take it through security?
No.
Yes, yes. But when you consider what Jesus was talking about, I don't know of better language to qualify the impact of the message Jesus shared in the Sermon on the Mount. And I was blown away by this, y'all. When I went to do research for this book, it was really hard to find other books about the Beatitudes. And I was disappointed by that on one hand. And then on the other hand, I was very, very excited because I thought Jesus' very first message deserves a lot of attention. And whatever he chose to talk about in his very first message ever recorded on planet Earth deserves a lot of attention. And so, what did he talk about? Blessed are those who are poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. And Jesus walks through several of these ideas, these ideals. I call them codes in the book because they're codes to detonate joy. But he's showing us the way to a life where God's presence is dynamic in our lives, not just static. And
I like
so,
that.
yeah, very
Dynamic,
passionate
not
about it. I
static.
could go on and on.
Well, why don't we do this? I think this would help. Why don't we define joy? What would you consider the definition of joy to be?
Yes, joy is the overwhelming flow of God's character present in every aspect of our lives. It is the overwhelming flow of God's character present in every aspect of our lives. And this is why I point to the character of God and not a feeling. The character of God and not, some Webster's dictionary definition. Because to really understand joy, we have to investigate who God is. And I think that's where a lot of even our modern understanding of happiness and joy has been thrown off. Because we want to connect it to something external. And God is trying to point us to the fact that joy comes from Christ being formed in us. And so that's where I'm trying to move people's hearts and minds toward. And you kind of have to bypass your religious reflex that says, hold on, bro, hold on. Christians aren't supposed to be happy. Christians aren't supposed to be joyful. We serve the suffering servant. We know, like Paul, Christ in the fellowship of his suffering. Well, Paul was also one who wrote the most about joy. And so the ideas of suffering and joy must be able to coexist because God exists within both realities. And so you kind of have to push back this idea of like smiling Christians means weak theology and get to the deeper thing that God would withhold no part of himself from us. And if God is a God of infinite joy, why would we not be people who experience and project that same type of joy?
I love that. I remember the first time that I experienced joy in a weird circumstance where there was none to be found. I struggle with some mental health problems and I take medication and something had gone wrong and I wasn't processing it right. And so they had to put me, literally in the psych ward for a week to do a quick meds change so I could be monitored. But I remember going from like crying uncontrollably, like, oh, this is going to be the worst week of my life. And then when we were waiting, my husband was with me for them to get all my paperwork ready. I started joking around with my husband. And at first he was like, are you having a breakdown right now? And I'm like, no. And I just, and there was just something, I literally started making up fun backstories for everybody that walked past us, like just super silly things. And it was just kind of that knowledge deep within me that God had me no matter what was going to happen. And in that, I became joyful, and that translated to happiness. So, you know, we've talked about the difference between joy and happiness. Happiness can be very dependent on our circumstances. Joy is something that comes from God. Would you say, though, that do you think that that's the key to happiness, too, is just being rooted in that joy? Because I feel like that turns into happiness.
Yes. Well, you're hovering over something very, very important, and I referenced this early on in the book
I saw you hovering
because
earlier.
yeah. It's incredible what she can do.
Ignore
Those
him.
glasses, superpowers.
Press on.
So I think that religious circles have kind of hijacked happiness, and we've created a distinction that the Bible doesn't actually make. And if you consider the fact that those sitting on the hillside listening to Jesus that day, when they heard the word blessed, they heard the word happy. In the original language, the word is interchangeable, that word blessed. So it literally means happy. It's the same word. Now, in the New Testament, it's Greek. In the Old Testament, it's Hebrew. It's the same word, though, in Psalm 1 that says, blessed are those that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor standeth in the way of sinners. That blessed, it means happy, glad, flourishing, prosperous. And so that's why it's so important to note that Jesus chose this word to say first, because the priority of him speaking it points us to the priority of us having it. And the modern day distinction between happiness and joy is something that people have made, but the first century believers would have not had that distinction. And the reason why I think that's important is you can almost find Christians who are guilty about feeling happy in hard circumstances. You will find Christians who have just buried someone they loved and then go into the fellowship hall and laugh as they tell stories. And there's a guilt that comes thinking, do I have permission to actually be happy right now?
It's like
but
you're
to
acting
your point,
inappropriately or something like that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But you're actually acting in alignment of the very way we were wired by God. That we deal with that code. Happy are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. We think that the path to us experiencing comfort and grief is through laughter. Is through laughter. But actually, us experiencing comfort and grief is through tears. You have permission to cry, and you have permission to belly laugh. The point is, you have permission to feel. And the faith that we carry, we don't elevate over our feelings and pretend like our feelings don't exist anymore. We bring that faith into our feelings, like you were just talking about with your life situation, where you felt your faith activated in the middle of a mess, and it led to experiencing joy in your life in an unlikely place.
I love that you said that too, because I remember very distinctly, I was visiting a church with my family and I heard from the pulpit that God doesn't want you to chase happiness. He wants you to chase him. And I remember thinking like, that would make me happy.
Yes.
That's kind of, that felt a little, I don't guess contradictory is the word, but it seemed like you're saying don't chase one, chase the other, but they're connected.
They are connected.
Yeah.
And it's actually God's common grace that God is so good. He will allow us to experience happiness in things. Let me say it like this. So I did some research on this. There's a pastor author, his name's David Murray, and he gave us 7 categories for happiness. I don't know if I can quote them all, but I'll go through the best that I can. There's vocational happiness, intellectual happiness, social happiness, humor happiness, nature happiness. Did I say vocational happiness?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let me see. Actually, I forgot.
Well, 5 out of 7 is pretty good.
Yeah. Also, I don't think I have nature happiness.
Yeah. Yeah, me neither.
I have sitting on the sofa happiness.
Yes. Oh, physical happiness. Physical
That's my
happiness.
physical happiness.
There
is
you
sitting
go.
on the
Yes.
sofa.
So social, vocational, physical, intellectual, nature, humor, and then the 7th is spiritual happiness. Now, by the common grace of God, we can experience a level of happiness in all 6 of those categories. So you cannot have a relationship with God and go on a hike and feel joy. You can go to work and get the promotion and you can feel joy. But without the 7th category of happiness, spiritual happiness, all of those other things that come into our lives leak. Because spiritual happiness is the seal of joy around the human soul. And without it, we can swallow the world whole and still be empty. But with it, it amplifies every other category of happiness. So if I'm spiritually content in knowing that I belong to God and He belongs to me, I get more joy out of my work. I get more joy out of nature, for those of you who enjoy nature. I get more joy out of my friendships with people because it's amplified by the goodness of God. And so, no, if someone says don't chase happiness, chase God, I would say find your happiness in God.
Amen.
Yes.
Because He is a God of infinite joy.
Love it.
Yeah. Love that. You know, I think back on my background. Parents were awesome in taking us to church, but it wasn't until somebody took me to a little Baptist church in college, which can just be such a tumultuous time. And the moment I walked in, I experienced this that you're talking about. This is true happiness. This is what is going to allow me to go beyond the things that are being said, the things that I'm experiencing, and this being Jesus. And so I hadn't really realized until I read Joy Bomb that the Beatitudes was Jesus's first message publicly to a crowd. And so I can only imagine how that must have been for him, because he's fully human too. To just stand up and start telling this crowd of people that they're going to be happy despite their circumstances.
Yes.
And so I'm just going to turn that kind of open-ended comment your way. What has this done for you and your family?
That's what struck me, Sally, was that he chose this to talk about. It must be pretty important.
Yeah.
And I was just arrested by that idea, so I started looking more and more closely to it. You know, as far as it applies to family, the boys helped me with different cover options, and we sat around the table one night just coloring out what the cover of this thing could be. And I think we're going to use it for the devotional that will follow this. But it's impacted us. I talk a lot about the boys. I talk a lot about Lorna throughout the book. Just that's a big part of my life. The biggest part of my life is my family. So a lot of what I learn about God, I learn through them, through relationships with them. And I'm pointing them back to these ideas. I mean, in particular, I'm pointing them to blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth, because these boys got big heads. They think they're God's gift to humanity. I mean, they go out and play flag football, make an interception, and they're, doing all kinds of hand gestures and too small. Like, I'm like, bro, you're too small. You can't reach the milk in the refrigerator, and you're out here acting like a giant out here, and you got my genes, so you're not a giant. So we're using these ideas of humility, of understanding that meekness is strength under control, that our strengths are not to be used for status, they're to be used for service. That the God that we serve was Jesus, being co-equal with God, thought it not robbery to empty himself, to become the lowest form, a human, a servant, even becoming obedient to death on the cross. And so the gospel is woven throughout this book, and that's really my ultimate hope. Because if you're going to discover joy, you have to be introduced to Jesus.
Amen.
And he's not just giving us characteristics of a Christian in the Beatitudes. And I think I lived the majority of my life thinking, oh, I'm supposed to be like this list. And I'm going to try to check this stuff off, but I don't totally understand it. But Jesus was actually describing himself in the Beatitudes. He was the one who became poor in spirit.
Oh, wow.
That's an
Interesting
interesting
thought.
thought. Yeah.
He was the one who mourned in the garden so that he could be
Yes.
comforted in the resurrection. He was the king crowned with meekness.
Yes.
He was the purest of heart. He was the one who hungered and thirsted after righteousness, so much so when he was thirsty and they tried to give him something to drink, he refused it because the only thing that would quench his thirst was our righteousness being fulfilled. So it's an introduction to the person of Jesus. And then if we can get to know him, then we have an actual hope of becoming those that are made in his image.
That's just incredible insight. Actually, I just need to close my mouth. It's just
We could hang out on
hanging
that
open
for a
right
while.
now.
Right.
That's amazing. Yes.
I wanted
thank you for
to,
that.
Sally, if you don't mind, I wanted to speak to what you said too, of the people that were listening there and they were in shock, like,
Yeah,
and even like, what is this guy talking about?
exactly.
There were two groups of people that were there: the disciples, those who are already kind of like, I'm going to follow Jesus, and the Pharisees. And so you have this message hitting these two different groups of people and them hearing two completely different things.
Interesting.
So you have the disciples, which we know this because they are working in a trade. They were not chosen to continue following a rabbi after the age of 12. Because in that culture, in that custom, all Jewish boys learned the Torah, they studied, they learned, and then it would be decided whether or not you had what it took to continue to follow in the footsteps of a rabbi, to become a holy man in their religious system. So the fact that these guys were fishermen, tax collectors, lets us know they did not qualify to go to the next level of religious society. And so when they hear Jesus say, blessed are the poor in spirit, they're like, this is the best news ever. I'm poor in spirit. I've been told I'm not good enough my whole life. I had to go work my father's trade because I didn't have the acumen. I didn't have the intellect. I didn't have the pedigree to follow a rabbi. That's why these guys dropped everything they were doing to follow Jesus. Jesus was a rabbi and they had been rejected by the rabbis. So this is an amazing moment for them. They just got a walk-on scholarship. And they were undrafted.
Yeah.
And then you have the Pharisees who were the creme de la creme. They were the top. They were experts. They paid tithe. They tithed on spices. I mean, they kept the letter of the law to the T. Their prayers were grand and beautiful on street corners. Their clothes were beautiful. They had political power because they had aligned themselves with Rome. And Jesus is saying, all that stuff that you think makes you a good candidate for this kingdom means nothing.
Doesn't matter. Yeah.
Wow.
So that's why they're like, this dude's a problem. We have to kill this guy because he's attacking us.
He's outing us. Yeah.
Yes. And so it's great news for us, depending on how we see ourselves. If we see ourselves as the unqualified, the least of the least, guess what? You're a great candidate for the grace of God to be activated in your life. You didn't go to Bible college. You don't know the Greek and the Hebrew, and you haven't been in church your whole life, and you're new to this, and practically nothing makes sense to you. Welcome to the party. The disciples never understood anything, ever. They never, ever understood anything.
They were always
And
asking
yet
to
God-
explain things. You're right.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
God used them. And then the Pharisees could not take their works off. And so they could not see Jesus. And so for those of us that grew up religious and grew up in religious circles, we got to make sure, was I really introduced to Jesus, or have I been walking with religion? If I'm not willing to confess how sinful and broken and in need I am of a Savior, then I'm not a very good candidate for what Jesus is trying to do.
Ooh,
Wow.
that's good. Well, let's talk about the Beatitudes. And you have written 8 chapters, or you say codes. I like that.
Yeah.
To turn on that joy bomb. Let's talk about a few of those. You talk about happy are the spiritually bankrupt, desperately sad. Yeah, unpack some of that for us. And it's fascinating to me. This is the nature of Christ. You listen to these things and you think that sounds bad, or these don't sound like they don't sound like uplifting qualities.
I don't want to be any of those things.
Yes, exactly.
Unreasonably forgiving. My eyes went to that one.
Yes, I know. It's really there's so much. It's hard to even know where to start. That's why I started with code 1 in the book. But there is so much there. There's even let's just stay on poor in spirit here for a second, because it's not just recognizing my sin and my need of a Savior. One of the things that I bring out is one of our greatest indicators of our destiny is our deficits.
Ooh. I
That
need to
we-
write that down.
We always tell our kids, I stopped saying this at a certain point, but you can be anything you want to be. You can be anything you want to be. Don't let them tell you can't be that. That's not true. They can be anything God has called them to be.
Oh.
But their deficits will point them in the direction of their destiny just as much as their strengths will. And I think we have a lot of people who are not operating in their full purpose because they're trying to do stuff God didn't create them for. And so it's realizing what we lack that gives us the ability to see what we can become. When I was a kid and my 5th or 6th grade teacher said, all right, you guys are going to write about what you want to be when you grow up. Oh, I was so hyped because I was going to the NBA, y'all. That's the National Basketball Association. It's a
Thank you.
sport called basketball.
Appreciate
You
that.
know, I was wondering, right?
Oh, that was awesome, Tauren. Way to go.
How many touchdowns does it take to win a game?
Yeah. 2 points for every touchdown. And once you get 4, it's a grand slam.
Okay.
So-
I'm on board. I got it.
That's awesome.
But
Love
I
it.
turned in my paper and I worked so hard on it because, I grew up in the 90s. I wanted to be Michael Jordan, Grant Hill, Scottie Pippen.
Yep.
And I got that paper back with a big old F at the top. This is back when we gave kids actual grades. I don't know if y'all remember this.
I
It wasn't an
definitely do.
evaluation. It was a grade.
Yes, they don't do that anymore. My kids get report cards and it says like progressing towards standard. I'm like, what does this even mean?
Oh my goodness.
What's progressing towards?
That's
I
your
need a
textbook.
letter.
Is my son passing or not?
Yes. So I got this big old F on my paper, I went to my teacher. I said, man, why'd I fail? He said, this is unrealistic. I said, it's unrealistic. What's unrealistic? He said, do you know how many people want to be professional basketball players who never become professional basketball players? Most of them. Only 1% of people. It's unrealistic. You need to write a new paper. I was so mad. I went home complaining to my parent. They said I can't play basketball.
Good for you.
And then, of course, my dad, being a great dad, he's like, well, you just got to get out there and work. You got to get out there and work. You got to dribble. You got to work on your handles. You got to work on your shot, all that. So I did that for, 3 weeks. And then I started to look at my dad. I saw he was 5'11". And I started to think, I don't even know any professional basketball players. And I started to think, maybe I'm not going to be a professional basketball player. You know what I started doing? Singing.
Wow.
And then I sang. And when it came time for me to decide in high school, am I going to pursue sports or am I going to be a church kid? I chose being a church kid because something resonated in me with that. And here's the cool thing. I am now 39 years old. I went to my first ever Detroit Pistons game earlier this year, and I got to sing for the halftime show. Take it all back. Holla. And it was my first time going to a Pistons game. Grew up in Michigan. I got to bring my mom with me. So I was standing on the NBA hardwood, not as a professional basketball player, but as a professional singer. Because at some point I came to terms with what I was not. And I think that if we really have faith and trust in God, we will allow ourselves to realize who we are not. So that we can become everything God has created us to be. And in that, we find great joy.
That's good.
Love that. I want to go back to
guys.
something you said earlier where blessed and happy are interchangeable. I find it surprising that I was today years old the first time that I heard that. You would think that would be a really prevalent message. And
That is exactly my point.
Yeah, I've never, and it kind of like, I've literally like in the background of my mind this whole time that's just been percolating.
You're pointing to something so important because most of us feel like we've heard everything that there is to hear about joy, or at least we just like understand it. I understand happiness. I understand joy. And that was one of my favorite endorsements, actually, from the president of my record label. He said that through this book, I was able to take something we kind of assume we all know and take us into deeper places, which is that's the point of the book, is for people to discover who Jesus is through his joy. And it makes a difference. It makes a difference how we live our lives. It makes a difference when you believe that God is uniquely invested in your happiness. That doesn't mean he's going to give you everything that you want. That doesn't mean you're not going to go through pain and hardship and loss and really, really hard things. But it is the promise that beneath rock bottom is something greater. And it's the joy of the Lord. And it's that joy of the Lord that is our strength. The amazing thing is where Jesus chose to share this message. Before you even get to the codes, we have to evaluate where he was. Jesus didn't choose to be anywhere on accident. He showed up everywhere intentionally. And so he chose, I believe, this mountain called Aramis to communicate this message. It wasn't Mount Sinai. It wasn't a Mount Zion, all of these mountains that we know the name of. No, he talked about joy in a nameless place. Somewhere history would not really record. I had to dig to find the name of this. Because you know what? It actually wasn't even a mountain. We call it the Sermon on the Mount. It was a hill. I just preached this message at my pastor's church. And he was like, have you been to Aramis, to the place where Jesus preached his message? I said, no, I've never been there. He said, you have to see this video. He said, it's nothing. It's nothing. And I'm like, I know, I understand that. He was like, no. It's nothing. He showed me a video. It's literally nothing.
Wow.
And I was blown away because I'd never seen it, but I studied it. And the word Aramis actually means desolate,
Wow.
isolated, and strength. Now, one of those is not like the other. I'm not putting strength alongside desolate and isolated. But I think Jesus chose a nameless kind of hill, not the top of the mountain. That would insinuate we find joy in the high places. Not the bottom of the mountain. That would insinuate we can only find joy when we're at our absolute lowest. But no, just on the hillside. In an ordinary, desolate, isolated place, he shows us where the true strength of joy is found. And I think he picked a place that was desolate so that we wouldn't try to reach for things that are external for us to find joy. I think he picked a place that would mean isolated so that he would know when the breakup happens, when we bury a parent, when we bury a child, when we walk through a difficult season of life and we feel alone, that joy is possible there. That strength is possible there, that he's with us there. So he even chose the place that he preached about joy intentionally to let us know, no matter where we're at in our lives, joy is always possible if we're focused on the right things.
Good.
Yeah, it's amazing. One of the ones that stuck out to me is blessed are the poor in spirit. And the way I related to that is the fact that I find myself apologizing all the time for what I think are my insecurities and my lack of ability. And actually that sort of smacked me right in the face that that can be as false as anything else. And so just blessed are the poor in spirit. How did you relate to that statement when you read it and put it in your book here?
Well, it was the best news. It actually made a lot of things make sense for me. Because I'm like, God, why do I get to do this? Why do I get this life? Why do I get health when I see so many people suffering? Why do I get this beautiful family and all of this stuff? Like, did I do something? And I just know I didn't. Like, I didn't do anything to deserve any of this. In fact, what I actually deserve is death. And God just keeps heaping the grace on. Grace after grace, gift after gift, goodness after goodness. That doesn't mean I haven't walked through hard things. I've walked through my own addictions. I've walked through my own sense of rejection. I've walked through my own deep loneliness in my life. And still, grace upon grace. And that's the beautiful thing to me. But I want to speak to something you said, Sally, because I think it's so important that we recognize this. Oh my goodness. Somebody's probably going to take a clip of this, take it out of context, and call me a prosperity preacher, which, if you've listened to any of my preaching, would be the furthest thing from the truth. But also, I don't see any other life but a prosperous life in the scripture. As long as you're not connecting prosperity to material possessions. The scripture says that he wants us to prosper even as our souls prosper. So God's hope for humanity is a flourishing. I believe Jesus stepped out on this mountainside and communicated this message, blessed, because he was reorienting the hearts of people around God's initial intentions for his relationship with people. In Genesis, the first interaction God has with humans after he makes them is he blesses them. We always say, You know, God said, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, subdue it. But before he told us what to do, he blesses us. It says, and he blessed them and told them to be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth. And so blessing is the original intention of the heart of God. Now, because of the fall of man, what we ended up with was a curse. Actually, the last word of the Old Testament is the word curse. Because that's all we were left with. All the law, all the religion, all the ritual, we were under the curse of the law. And that's why it's so important when Jesus preached, the first word he said was blessed. He was reversing everything back to the original intent to bring a new covenant of grace to connect us to God's heart for people, that we would be a blessed people filled with his heart. And a part of that blessing is human flourishing. And that is God giving you permission to be great.
Wow.
And that is what sets us free. That is what sets us free when somebody says something unkind. That is what sets us free when, you know, our finances don't go in the way we expect them to go. That is what sets us free from the physical things of life that drag us down. And we get that joy bomb of recognizing that we are who we are in the Lord and nothing happens apart from his knowledge. And I love that. Thank you.
So beautiful. And I know that sometimes, like you said, it's things people say to us that make us believe in ourselves a little bit less.
Yep.
But man, there's no greater critic of me than me.
I'm very good at myself.
I can talk about you. And I tell my wife this all the time because she has a very strong inner critic, and sometimes that inner critic will speak out loud. And I'll say, don't talk about my wife like that.
I love that.
I happen to really love my wife. I happen to really love her voice. I happen to really love the way she looks. I happen to really love her laugh. And God feels the same about you. Don't criticize what he created. He happens to love you. He happens to love you with your brokenness and with the things that you haven't gotten over yet and with the issues that you have. He happens to love you. He happens to be there with you even while you walk through those things, and his grace leads you toward wholeness and healing. He happens to love you, and you have permission to be great. You have permission. People have a problem with this because part of the message of Jesus is you got to get low. And that is absolutely true. That's the poor in spirit part. But being meek does not, it does not strip away from you what you're actually good at. It does not strip away your actual strengths. You guys are actually good at talking, which is why I don't know why you're allowing me to do so much of it. But you guys have an ability, a winsome ability to bring ideas and thoughts to people and connect with people's hearts, even to the point of generating revenue with your giftings. This is something God has graced you with. It's a great gift that you have. And God's not intimidated by the gift that he gave you. It's from him. So we have to really relearn humility. Everything we know about Jesus, he told us. And so many times we're not even willing to tell ourselves that we're good at things because we're so worried about being proud and prideful. God told Abraham, I'll make you a great nation. God told Joshua, I'll elevate your name in the eyes of the people. God told Solomon, I will make your name famous. They will talk about you for generations. God is not opposed to human greatness. First of all, because the highest level of human greatness isn't even getting up to God's shoelaces.
Well said.
He has no rival. And if you have no rival, you cannot be intimidated. So God is not intimidated by what he gave you to make his name great. So I think we need to have Christians stop walking around apologizing for being in the room, for speaking up, for having an opinion, for having a gift. Now, if you're using that gift to hold others down, to keep people out, to marginalize, to puff up yourself, then you're misusing the gift. But if you're using that gift to call people higher and lift people and move the kingdom forward, if I would, it took so much for me to jump over all the insecurities that I had to write this book. But you know what? I love to write. And I don't have to be held to other people's expectations of all you do is sing songs. No, I don't. God told me he was going to use me with this. Here I am. I'm doing it. It's unapologetic. I'm going to promote it. Why am I going to work so hard to unveil a message I believe God gave me and then go bury it in my insecurity? Wow. This is why Saul had such a hard time taking the throne, because he was hidden among the stuff. The question is, what are you hiding behind today while you have a throne to sit on and a kingdom to rule? God is not intimidated. We got to stop hiding. We got to stop apologizing. We have to take on meekness. It's recognizing I have strength, but I'm putting it under God's control to make a kingdom impact.
I love that. It's like a different way of, you think that
me in the heart.
promotion is wrong, and it's not necessarily wrong. I think it's, why are you doing it? And what's the reasons behind it? Yeah,
yes,
absolutely. Sir. Hey, let's talk about something. You talk about brokenness and you know, it's interesting how we pretend at church everything's fantastic and wonderful, but it's not. And you said that it's important for us to work through our pain and view our scars as trophies. Talk about that, something that we've survived instead of being ashamed of. Talk about that.
Yes. Well, the scripture says that we overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony. And so it's not just our key to getting free, sharing our testimony. It's our key to staying free. And so every scar is a key that unlocks the door to someone else's healing. And so many Christians are sort of afraid of what happens when the truth gets out, that we keep those keys to other people's deliverances in our pockets. And so this is just that idea of we've got to allow ourselves to be known. We've got to allow our stories to be known. We've got to allow people to know what God has done so they can believe in what God can do. People find hope through our stories.
Yep.
They find hope through our ability to share authentically and say, this is what I went through and you can make it through it too. I remember being in a church service. I was blown away by this. Student pastor was preaching to about 1,000 students. And he did this thing that was made popular by MTV. MTV had a show called If You Really Knew Me. And they were combating bullying in schools. And so a group of facilitators would go into a school, bring the kids into the gym. They would all line up on one side of the gym on the wall. And then every time the facilitator made a statement, those students were to step forward. And the statements would be, how many of you woke up feeling lonely today? And students would step forward. How many of you come from a home where your parents were divorced? Students would step forward. How many of you have had a family member die from an overdose? Students would step forward. And before you know it, the majority of the gym is on the other side of the room looking around at each other saying, I had no idea you've gone through all of that. I had no idea you were carrying all of that pain. And so my friend did this in a church service with students, and I thought, this is going to be different than what we saw on MTV. This is church. One by one. How many of you have been abused? How many of you have suffered through this or that? pretty soon the whole room was in the altar. Because the truth is, everyone is going through something painful. We are all walking through storms. If you're not in a storm right now, just get ready.
It's out there.
You're going into one.
Get ready to hunker down because here it
Yes.
comes.
And if you're in one, you're about to come out of one.
Amen. Oh, I love that.
And that's just the reality of who God is. But we've got to remember, we're not the only one. That's a hell-hatched lie. You are not alone in your struggles, in your loneliness, in your failures. You're not alone. Even in things that aren't bad, things that are just broken. You're not alone in that. And if we would be willing enough to be like Jesus and show people our scars, they would know that healing exists.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. That's so good. Talk about grieving and that we can have joy in the middle of grief. My wife and I, we lost a daughter this past summer. She was diagnosed with multiple disabilities. She ended up in the hospital, and after about a little over a month of being there, the doctors said, you need to make a decision whether you're going to, allow your daughter to go or continue the same level of aggressive care, and she'll probably be in an institution, or she'll be in a home the rest of her life. And we had to make that decision to put her in the arms of Jesus. And I get how to have joy in the midst of grief, but maybe unpack that for us all. And I think I need to understand it better too, because I know that you've lost some people close to you.
Yeah, I think maybe it'd be better if you walked us through that. I'm so sorry
Well,
to hear that. What was her name?
Abby Grace. Yeah, she was
Abby
21.
Grace. Beautiful. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm sure that that's very fresh, and it will be fresh for the rest of your life, I'm sure. Words really fall short of a loss like that. And I've learned this, particularly through pastoring for the last year and a half, but you really got to learn how to mourn with those who mourn and meet people where they're at. And that's part of what the reality I believe Jesus was teaching, was that you will mourn.
Mm-hmm.
There's no avoiding the pain of the human existence. This thing called death is coming for us all. But because of the grace and reality of Jesus, there's something greater than death. That death has been swallowed up. And that when we view our lives through the framework of eternity, the idea that one day we will be in God's presence where He will Himself wipe our tears from our eyes, at least puts a healing balm on our spirit and gives us a hope. We are not those who grieve without hope, because we know that one day Jesus will return and He will have Abby Grace with Him. And He will have those who have gone before us with Him. And we will be reunited with Him and them in the air. And I love how Levi Lusko said this on my podcast. He said when he lost his baby girl, I think she was 5 years old on Christmas Day.
That's tough.
He said, I had to, through my grieving process, stop counting the days that she had left and start counting the days until he would see her again. And so every day was just a day closer to being reunited. But you know what he told me? He said, I had to go through the grief. I had to go in the closet and weep and cry and be frustrated and journal and write and talk to people and get counseling and help. I had to go through it. And I think a lot of us have been taught, even in Christian circles, that we're supposed to elevate our faith over our feelings. That we're supposed to carry this great faith and then just bury our feelings and pretend like they don't exist. That's not what Jesus is teaching. Jesus is saying, in order for you to mourn, you're going to have to feel what you feel. And there's no guilt for being sad. My mom had a favorite movie when I was growing up that she loved called A League of Their Own.
Oh, I love that movie.
There's
Y'all
no
remember
crying in
this?
baseball.
Yes. Oh, so
That
good.
is the line. That is the line.
Yeah.
But some of us have made "there's no crying in baseball" a mantra for our lives.
Yep.
Wow.
There's no crying in life. There's no feeling this pain. But what Jesus is teaching us is he has created the mechanism of mourning to deliver us from the grip of grief. And it is through our tears, literally through our tears, that we sow seeds of joy. They that sow in tears will reap in joy. If you hold your tears and you don't cry and you don't feel, you don't get the harvest of joy. You stay trapped in your grief. But every teardrop is deliverance. Every teardrop is God setting you free, one chain link at a time. And eventually you'll look back on the hurts of your life and you will feel them, but they won't control you. And that is the beauty that God gives us through this message.
Wow.
It's amazing. I have your pre-release book in front of me, but we've got to wrap this up. We're past, but I thought, would you mind reading to us under your Set It Off section at the very back? On my
Yes.
book, it's 209, page 209. The second paragraph starts with imagine. And I
Yeah.
would just love for you to read that.
Yes.
As a way of
I happen
closing.
I grabbed my book right before. I haven't had my book for any other interviews. I just happened to grab it.
Ah,
It was on my wife's nightstand and she hadn't read it, so I figured I'd just take it.
Where is she?
oh goodness.
Just kidding. She wants to read it when she gets it from Barnes & Noble. Okay. Imagine what it feels like to live from this kind of joy. It's more than a quick lift or a good mood. It's a steady, rooted joy that fills every corner of our lives, spilling into even the smallest moments. It's that sense of peace when everything else is uncertain. That confidence in knowing that we're walking in step with something bigger than ourselves. That hope in the darkest times that somehow, some way, there's more ahead. This joy doesn't just uplift. It changes us. And through us, it changes others. Can I read the last paragraph too?
Oh, please.
Yeah.
The Beatitudes have shown us a way of life in which God's joy flows freely, meeting us exactly where we are. This joy is born from letting go of the need to keep up, from daring to face our grief with honesty, from allowing ourselves to depend on God even when we feel empty. It grows through the freedom of forgiveness, the quiet strength of humility, the pull toward justice, and the peace we bring others. And yes, even when things get uncomfortable or unpopular, this joy stays unshaken.
That's beautiful.
Wow.
Thank you, Tauren.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is good.
Man,
Thank
do we
you.
have another 4 hours with you?
Yeah.
I know.
Well, you got to spin it in this book here.
That's
Yeah,
it.
this is good. Joy Bomb, Tauren Wells, Unleash Jesus' Explosive Joy for an Extraordinary Life. I think you've opened our eyes, our hearts to thoughts we've probably never thought before regarding this. And I'm just blown away by the Beatitudes again. That he was talking about his own nature. Never thought of that. It makes so sense now.
There's a lot of
yeah.
mind blown moments,
Yeah.
honestly, that happened today.
Amazing.
I
Thank
just
you all
said
so
it makes
much. And
so
thank you
sense.
for the
That's how
space.
ridiculous. Oh, you're
Yeah,
welcome.
Thank you.
You're welcome, brother. This is good.